So let's make sure resources can be deleted. For that, we got this delete button here in the learning resource.view file. At the moment, this button isn't doing anything though. Now, of course, it should remove the resource on which we click this from our stored resources array in the resources. Now, since we're using dynamic components, custom events are probably not how we want to solve this, and therefore instead I will do it just like we're handling it for adding resources. I'll add a remove resource method here, where I expect to get that resource ID of the resource that should be deleted. And now we need to update our stored resources. Now there are two ways of doing that. And I will first of all show you the way that will not work and let you know why it's not working. The first approach would be that we set our stored resources equal to a new array which is derived from stored resources, but where we use the filter method to filter out the resource that has this ID. For that, we could execute a function on every resource. JavaScript does this for us automatically, and we will ensure that the resource with the ID we're getting here gets dropped by adding this code. This will indeed, if I console log this will indeed ensure that the resource is removed from stored resources. We can now provide this function just as we're providing add resource. We can add delete resource as a key here and point at this remove resource. Of course, you could also use the same names here if you wanted that. And now we can inject delete resource into the learning resource component. Here we can now inject delete resource, so this newly added key which points at the remove resource method. And when the user clicks this button here with a click listener, we point at this delete resource method which was injected. Actually, we don't just point at it, we also execute it, and for that we need the ID of the resource, so we should expect that as a prop. And once we do get the ID of this resource as a prop, we can use it here to provide it to this delete resource method, and therefore to the remove resource method in the resources. Now we just need to ensure that this ID prop is provided, so in stored resources, where we are creating all the learning resources, there we now also provide this ID prop which we just added. With that, it should work. But you'll notice that if I click delete, nothing happens. On the other hand, if I open the developer tools, we will see that the resource was deleted. We can actually see this best if I don't log the resources, but for example, the length here. If the length is 1, that means that the resource was deleted, because initially we have a length of 2. So let's try this again. If I reload, click delete, you see we get a length of 1. So the resource was deleted, but we don't see this on the screen. Why? Because of provide, inject, and how it works. We do provide our stored resources here, right? Now, Vue executes this provide method in the end when it creates this component. So it then injects this stored resources array into all the components that need resources. The thing is, this is an array, and therefore it's a value stored in memory. It's a reference value in JavaScript. When we change this array by pushing or by unshifting, as we're doing it for adding a resource, that changes the same array in memory which we originally provided. And therefore Vue is able to recognize the changes we made to it, and all the places that injected this resources key will get notified about those changes. If we, however, use this approach, I'm overriding this stored resources with a brand new array. And this brand new array is then not re-provided to all the other components. So all the components that injected resources are still working with the original array. So how can we work around that? Well, one easy way of working around that here is that we don't overwrite the old array, but that instead we use a slightly different approach. We get the index of the resource we want to delete in our stored resources array, and we can do this with the findIndex method, which exists on JavaScript arrays. Here I want to find the resource where the ID is equal to the resource ID we're getting as an argument. That's then giving us the index of the resource we want to delete. And then we can use the splice method on the stored resources array to splice, so to remove, this element at this index and just this element. This manipulates the original array instead of creating a new one. So it's just like pushing and unshifting. And therefore here, Vue will be able to recognize this, and all the components that injected this array will notice this as well. So now if I reload and click delete, we are able to delete resources. So let's also add a new resource here. And we can delete that as well. So that's now all working. And with that, we got this app finished. And we used a lot of the concepts you learned about throughout the last modules. And therefore, hopefully, you now have a better idea of how to work with components, how to build at least a little bit bigger Vue applications, and how all these different features are working together.